Season 3 of Jujutsu Kaisen had a lot of politics, a lot of rules, and a lot of death, and today we're explaining everything that you actually need to know. As a quick reminder, I have a video explaining the first 2 seasons of JJK and also the movie, so if you want to refresh your memory, then the link should be in the description. For everyone else, let's dive straight into Season 3, and I think the best place to start is with the Zenin Clan. As we know, the Zenin are one of the big 3 sorcerer families, and during Shibuya, their leader got barbecued by Jogo. Roughly 8 days later, Naobito would finally die from his injuries, and in his will, his son Naoya was named as the new head of the clan. Being clan head meant that all of the Zenin's money, assets, and cursed tools, all of that were passed to him. However, there was one big condition. A long time ago, Naobito made a deal with Toji where they agreed for Megumi to join the clan once he developed a curse technique. As luck would have it, Megumi went on to have the most valuable curse technique in their entire bloodline, but Gojo stepped in and stopped the Zenin from getting their hands on him. Because of Gojo's strength, he was able to just do things like this because the higher-ups didn't have the power to beat him. This is why, in Naobito's will, he put a clause that said if Gojo is dead or unavailable for any reason, then Megumi should be brought into the clan. Not only that, the clause named Fushiguro as the new head of the family, but only if Gojo isn't around. From Naobito's point of view, this was his plan to bring the 10 shadows back to their family, because, the offer to be clan head is something that most people would accept. Politically speaking, Megumi is also just the best choice because he has a great relationship with the Gojo clan and the Kamo clan, and as a sorcerer, he's on track to be the best they've got. Sadly, after hearing this news, Naoya chose to ignore his dad's wishes as he traveled to Tokyo to kill Megumi. For context, ever since the Shibuya Incident, Tokyo had become a wasteland filled with millions of cursed spirits. Inside this wasteland, Yuji had spent the last 8 days killing curses, and somehow the Zenin clan knew that Fushiguro was in Tokyo trying to find him. Therefore, Naoya's belief was that once he found Yuji, then he'd find Megumi as well, but this turned out not to be true. Instead, when he found Yuji in Tokyo, the person who was with him was actually Choso. Even though these two had tried to kill each other during Shibuya, Choso had become an ally to Yuji after realizing that they're blood brothers. Since then, he'd been helping Itadori to wipe out the curses in Tokyo, but Naoya's appearance forced them to put that to the side. Just like Naobito, Naoya's technique is projection sorcery, which allows him to make 24 unique movements in a split second. Using this speed, his plan was to break Yuji's legs and basically hold him until Megumi shows up, but the fight got interrupted by Yuta. Recently, the higher-ups gave Yuta the job of executing Yuji, and this is something they'd been wanting to do since day one. Remember, according to the regulations, Yuji should have been killed a long time ago, and the only reason he's still alive is because Gojo's been backing him up. However, with Satoru now being locked in the prison realm, the higher-ups were finally free to do whatever they wanted. After a brief introduction, Naoya agreed to handle Choso while Okkotsu went after Yuji, and despite putting up a good fight, Itadori just isn't strong enough to win against a special grade sorcerer. In the end, Yuta won by getting Rika to hold him down, and then he just pierced through him with a katana. Later on, we'll explain why Rika is back even though her soul was previously set free, but for now, the main thing is that Yuji was dead. At the same time, Choso defeated Naoya with blood manipulation, and remember, Choso is partly a cursed spirit, meaning he can use this technique in ways that no human has ever done. That's why his original moves were able to catch Naoya by surprise, and more than that, Choso's non-human blood is poisonous to normal people. Unfortunately, before he could deal the finishing blow, Yuta showed up with Yuji's corpse and proceeded to casually knock Choso out. I think this scene did a great job of showing the huge gap between special grades and everyone else, but for Naoya this was clearly hard to accept. After all, from a young age, the Zenin clan treated Naoya like some kind of jujutsu genius who was destined to be the next head of the clan. This gave him a massively overinflated ego, and so to be replaced as clan head by a kid he's never met, and then to be humiliated in front of Yuta, it wasn't the best day. Regardless, he still needed Yuta's help because of the poisoned blood, and so Okkotsu agreed to heal him with RCT if Naoya told the higher-ups about Yuji's death. To understand why he wanted Naoya to do it, we need to talk a little bit about Yuta's true motivations. Until recently, Yuta had been on a very long mission in Africa, and about 2 months ago, Gojo went to visit him. On that trip, Gojo said that if anything was to happen to him, he wanted Okkotsu to protect Yuji and the other students. When Gojo then got sealed, Yuta had to make a choice because he knew that the higher-ups were looking for someone to execute Yuji. If someone else took the job, it's likely they'd kill Itadori without any remorse. Not to mention also that it's implied that Jujutsu HQ knew about Itadori's location. For that reason, Yuta volunteered to execute Yuji himself, because that way he'd be able to easily find him and protect him from people like Naoya. As a special grade sorcerer, Okkotsu was the most qualified to destroy Sukuna's vessel. However, due to his history with Gojo, the higher-ups didn't completely trust him. As a result, they forced him to enter a binding vow where Yuta agreed to actually complete the mission and kill Yuji. When Yuji's heart stopped beating, the binding vow was fulfilled in that moment, and so Yuta instantly tried to heal him with RCT. It's worth pointing out that Okkotsu wasn't sure this plan would work, and so while he waited for Yuji to heal, he got a high-ranking member of the Zenin Clan to confirm Itadori's death. Naoya being the one to confirm it, it meant that for now at least no one else would come after Yuji, because even without seeing a body, the higher-ups would believe that he's dead. Anyway, later that night when Itadori began to wake up, a memory of his parents flashed into his head. The main thing about this flashback is that we found out Yuji's mother was possessed by the same person who's currently controlling Geto. In other words, Choso wasn't crazy when he said that they were brothers, because Choso's dad is also Yuji's mom. With that said, once Itadori woke up, Yuta explained why he had to kill him, and in the end there were no hard feelings. By this stage in the timeline, Megumi had also joined them, and he was pretty desperate for their help because once again Sumiki was in a very bad situation. Remember that at the end of the Shibuya Incident, the fake Geto used Mahito's technique to create over 1,000 sorcerers. Many of these new sorcerers were just normal people who now have access to cursed energy and cursed techniques, while the others were ancient sorcerers like Sukuna, who now inhabited the bodies of modern day people. At the time, the fake Geto said that he planned to make them fight each other to the death, and Sumiki is one of these new sorcerers. Therefore, to figure out how to save both her and Gojo, Megumi's group paid a visit to Tengen. As we know, Tengen is the immortal sorcerer who lives underneath Jujutsu High, and she knows pretty much everything that happens inside her giant barriers. When Megumi's group arrived, she agreed to help them on one condition, which is that 2 of them have to stay behind as her bodyguards. Even though she's immortal, Tengen now needed protection, because with Gojo being sealed, the fake Geto's next target was going to be her. In this scene, she revealed that his real name is Kenjaku, and for the last 1,000 years, he's been trying to evolve humanity to the next stage. In recent history, Choso and Yuji are small examples of what his experiments can do, but his ultimate plan is to evolve the entire Japanese population. To do this, he planned to merge every single human in Japan, which is over 100 million people. He planned to merge everyone with Tengen. By doing this merger, he'd create a brand new monstrous life form that would have potential to destroy all life on the planet. In the past, something like this never would have been possible because historically, only a star plasma vessel can merge with Tengen. However, everything changed 12 years ago when the newest star plasma vessel, Riko Amanai, was murdered by Toji. Partly due to his actions, Tengen never got the chance to merge, and the result is that she began evolving into more of a cursed spirit. In this form, Kenjaku would have the power to absorb Tengen, since one of his techniques is cursed spirit manipulation. With this power, he could control Tengen in the same way he controls other cursed spirits, and his plan to merge the country, it would become possible. All of this is why Tengen now needed protection, and in the end, it was Choso and Yuki Tsukumo who volunteered to do the job. As a quick reminder, Yuki Tsukumo is Todo's mentor, a special grade sorcerer, and during this conversation, it was revealed that she's a former star plasma vessel. This means her DNA is compatible with Tengen, similar to Riko, but yeah, obviously these two didn't merge, and I think that was the smart choice because Jujutsu Society doesn't have many special grade sorcerers. Now, when it comes to Sumiki, the reason she's involved in all of this is that Kenjaku needs people like her to generate cursed energy. After all, if you want to merge 100 million people with Tengen, it's going to take a lot of cursed energy. In fact, it's going to take way more cursed energy than Kenjaku would ever have by himself. That's why he created this ritual known as the Culling Game, where players will generate cursed energy for him by killing each other. The way it works is that spread across Japan are 10 gigantic barriers referred to as colonies, and inside each colony is where the fighting is supposed to take place. The merger can begin once all the different colonies generate enough cursed energy, and according to Tengen, the process should take around 2 months. With that said, it's time to explain the Culling Game rules, and rule number 1 is that awakened sorcerers have 19 days to enter a colony of their choice. To put it simply, if you're one of the people who awakened a cursed technique, you have until the 20th of November to join the game. Considering that this meeting with Tengen took place on the 9th of November, it meant that during this episode, awakened sorcerers had just over 10 days to join the battle. If any of them fail to do this, then the Culling Game will remove their curse technique from their brain, and according to Shoko, this is pretty much a death sentence. Moving on, Rule 3 states that anyone can join the game by entering one of the colonies, although I should point out that when Kenjaku put up all these massive barriers, a lot of people were already inside that space. These innocent bystanders were given one chance to leave, and if they didn't say yes for any reason, then they become a Culling Game player. Now, rules 4 and 5 of the Culling Game, they say that players can gain points by killing other players. In particular, you get 5 points for killing a sorcerer, and just 1 point for killing a civilian. If a player then gains 100 points or more, Rule 6 says that you can spend 100 points to add a brand new rule to the Culling Game. By taking advantage of this, Megumi's group could theoretically add new rules that might allow Sumiki to escape, because right now, once a player enters a colony, they're not actually allowed to leave. However, according to Rule 7, any new rules can't be allowed to ruin the game, so basically you can't add rules that would drastically decrease the player count, or rules that would end the game early. Finally, Rule 8 says that if a player's score doesn't change for 19 days, then they'll die from curse technique removal. This means that for all players who have curse techniques, they have to kill at least one person every 19 days. After all, the only way to change your score is by killing people, so for all the awakened sorcerers who were just regular people a second ago, those guys have to become murderers if they want to survive the next few months. Anyhow, while Tengen was in the middle of explaining this, Megumi pointed out that freeing Gojo would automatically solve a lot of problems. To help with this, Tengen offered them the back of the prison realm, which she kept hidden until this moment. The main difference between the front and the back of the prison realm is that the front can be opened whenever the user wants it to be opened, whereas the back, you can't just do that. You have to break it open by force. Of course, this is a special grade curse object, so it's not easy for you to break it. You have to have a special grade curse tool, something like Toji's inverted spear of heaven, or potentially the black rope that Miguel had. The problem is that Gojo himself destroyed both of these objects, and when Yuta was in Africa, he couldn't find any more of the black rope. Therefore, the only hope to free Gojo was an ancient sorcerer known as Angel, who's currently a Culling Game player in one of the Tokyo colonies. Angel's technique gives her the power to negate other curse techniques, and if used on the back of the prison realm, Gojo would be set free. Following this info dump, the group then splits up to do their respective jobs, so let's go through them step by step. Firstly, Yuta's job was to immediately join the Culling Game so he could gather information and points that might be useful in the near future. Meanwhile, Yuji and Megumi's job was to recruit a suspended student named Hikari and persuade him to help them in the Culling Game. Like we said earlier, Choso and Yuki's job was to just stay and protect Tengen, and finally, Maki's job was to retrieve some cursed tools from the Zenin Clan. For context, thanks to her tough body and her heavenly restriction, Maki survived getting set on fire by Jogo, and while in the hospital, she convinced Megumi to accept the role of clan head. Even though he didn't want it, the role came with certain benefits that would help everyone, including intel from Jujutsu HQ and access to all the Zenin's cursed tools. I think more than anyone, Maki relies on these tools due to her low levels of curse energy, so with Megumi's permission, she went to the Zenin storage room. However, when she arrived on November the 12th, the entire place had been emptied out, and the only thing there was her dad, Ogi Zenin, and also her sister, who'd clearly just been attacked. The reason this happened is that Ogi was upset about a couple of things. Number one, he didn't like the Zenin's fortune going to Megumi, and number two, he just hates his own children. If we look at Ogi's family tree, you can see that his dad was the head of the Zenin Clan, his brother Naobito was also head of the Zenin Clan, and his other brother, who was Megumi's granddad, was another head of the Zenin Clan. In other words, in Ogi's direct family, he's the only man who was never clan head, and in his mind, it was his untalented children who were holding him back. That's why he came up with a plan to legally kill them, while also improving his reputation at the exact same time. Remember, when Gojo got sealed, the higher-ups made a bunch of new laws, and one of those laws was that Gojo is expelled from Jujutsu Society, and that it's a crime to try and free him from the prison realm. If a person was plotting to free him, then that makes them a rebel against Jujutsu HQ, and so killing them would be justified. Ogi's plan was to use this rule to his advantage to take out Maki, Mai, and eventually Megumi, and by killing his own kids, it'd prove his loyalty to the higher-ups. When Maki arrived to get the tools like he predicted she would, Ogi easily defeated her and threw both of his kids into a pit filled with cursed spirits. His expectation was that the curses would eat both of them alive, but instead, Maki received the biggest power-up of her entire life. The reason for this is that in the Jujutsu world, twins like Maki and Mai are essentially one sorcerer split into two different bodies. For some twins, this means they have the same curse technique and an equal share of the curse energy, while for others, it's not that simple. When it comes to these two, nearly all of their available curse energy went to Mai, and this was a problem since she never wanted to be a sorcerer. In other words, Mai's existence was physically holding Maki back, since Maki would never reach her full potential if one half of her doesn't want to become stronger. Now, in this scene, Mai was on the verge of death due to the injuries from her dad, and so she used the last of their curse energy to construct a special grade curse tool. This sword was actually a replica of Toji's soul split katana, and it's able to ignore someone's durability by cutting directly into their soul. To create this thing, Mai used up every drop of curse energy that they both had, and this had a huge impact on Maki's heavenly restriction. Up until now, she'd always had a tiny amount of CE, basically the same as a normal civilian, but thanks to Mai, she now genuinely had nothing left. With zero curse energy, her body essentially became like Toji's, and her heavenly restriction got an instant upgrade. Mai's final wish was for Maki to use these gifts to destroy the Zenin Clan, which, as we know, has been a terrible place for women and just a terrible place for anyone different. Following Mai's death, a bloodlusted Maki then emerged from the pit, and without much effort, she sliced through her dad's skull and then proceeded to massacre the rest of the clan. At first, she took down the entire Kukuru unit, who were all of the Zenin men who don't have curse techniques. What's crazy is Maki used to be part of this group before she went to Jujutsu High, but she didn't have any problem killing all of her former comrades. After wiping out dozens of low-level sorcerers, her next target was the Hei, who were mostly grade 1 sorcerers like Toji's brother Junichi. With her new strength, Maki was able to butcher all of them despite their curse techniques, and the only one who gave her any problems was Naoya. Initially, the speed of his projection sorcery did catch her by surprise, and yeah, if it wasn't for her durability, then he probably should have won right here. That said, Naoya famously has pillow hands, and Maki was able to survive long enough to understand his technique. In this scene, we can see her eyes rapidly moving and keeping track of his 24 movements per second, and through this observation, she realized how the technique works. Most people never notice this and they end up getting frozen, but once Maki understood, she adapted to Naoya's technique and she moved at 24 frames herself. This is the only way to avoid getting frozen once you've been touched by projection sorcery, and Naoya wasn't able to avoid her punch because he had locked in his 24 movements and he wasn't expecting her to turn around. The rules of projection sorcery say that once you've locked in your 24 movements, you can't change it, and so yeah, he was forced to just watch helplessly as she punched his face in. After breaking every bone in Naoya's skull, Maki then went to deal with her mother, who was both a victim and an active participant in the Zenin Clan's abuse. During Maki's childhood, her mother treated her terribly and basically bullied her, so yeah, there wasn't a lot of love between them. Importantly though, we have to mention that Maki's attack against her mother and her attack against Naoya, it didn't kill them straight away, and so both of them ended up surviving just a little bit longer. This led to a pretty bizarre situation where Naoya was crawling back to the house and then Maki's mom just shows up out of nowhere and stabs him with a regular kitchen knife. By the time this was happening though, Maki had already left, so she wasn't aware that her mother is the one who actually killed Naoya. Following this, Maki tracked down all of the Zenin sorcerers who weren't there on the day of the massacre, including 6 other members of the Hei and at least 30 other Zenin as well. After killing every last one of them, the Zenin had lost their entire fighting force, and as a result, the Gojo clan and the Kamo clan proposed the idea of removing the Zenin from the big 3 families. Anyhow, if we switch over to Yuji and Megumi, after leaving Tengen, it took them over 24 hours to reach Akari's location. On the 10th of November, they arrived at this underground fight club, which is a place where civilians go to place bets on sorcerer fights. Hikari created this club after getting suspended from Jujutsu High, and yeah, under the regulations, it's completely illegal. For that reason, Megumi thought Hikari would run if he saw they were from Jujutsu High, hence why they changed out of their uniforms. The plan here was to get close to Hikari by taking part in the fight club, and for several hours, Yuji fought against other sorcerers, including Panda. During these fights, he just naturally put on a great show for the audience, and at 1 AM the next day, they brought him to speak with Hikari. The one problem with Yuji is that he is a terrible liar, and so Megumi and Panda were concerned that he'd reveal he's from Jujutsu High. If that happened, Hikari would likely call his guards and, the meeting would be over super quickly, and so to prevent that, the two of them knocked out all the guards to buy Yuji some more time. However, in the end they got spotted by Kirara, and this character is another suspended third year student. Kirara is heavily implied by Panda to be a trans woman, and it's also implied by the story that she's Hikari's girlfriend. When she saw Megumi standing next to Panda, she kind of put together the dots and realized that Yuji is also from Jujutsu High. As you'd expect, Panda and Megumi tried to restrain her, but Kirara's technique prevented them from even getting close. The name of her curse technique is Love Rendezvous, and if you want an in-depth breakdown, I made this video explaining the technique in way more detail. For today though, all we have to say is that once Kirara marks you with her technique, you can't touch her unless you first touch certain other things that she's also marked. There's also a specific order that you need to touch these things, and it's all based on the Southern Cross constellation, and when Megumi eventually figured this out, he managed to grab her with Divine Dog. Following that, she then cancelled her technique, and after a brief conversation, Fushiguro convinced her to help them out. Kirara's support was very important in getting Hikari to join their side, although it also helped that Yuji showed a lot of passion when trying to recruit him. In the end, Hikari agreed to help them on one condition, which is that once the Culling Game is done, the rest of them need to support him in changing the Jujutsu regulations. His ultimate goal was for his fight club to be legalized, and with support from the Zenin Clan head, he thought it might be possible. By the way, another development was that Panda revealed his dad, Principal Yaga, had been killed by the higher-ups. Shortly after Gojo was sealed, the higher-ups sentenced Yaga to death, which is something they'd wanted to do ever since he created Panda. Remember, Panda is a special puppet who generates his own curse energy, and the higher-ups were afraid that Yaga could create an entire army of these things. To protect himself, Yaga claimed that he didn't know how Panda was made, but obviously we know this isn't true since he went on to make a bunch more of these puppets in secret. The problem for the higher-ups is that they couldn't do anything about it because up until now, Yaga had Gojo backing him up. However, now that Satoru was gone, they could do whatever they liked, and so they gave Yaga one chance to live if he told them how to make cursed corpses like Panda. When the principal didn't do this, he was executed by Gakuganji, and right before his death, he made a pretty interesting choice. Despite refusing to share his secret previously, right before he died, Yaga told his friend how to make sentient cursed corpses. The exact reason he did this is debatable. I mean, he could have just died without saying anything, he didn't need to reveal his secret, and so personally I think there are two factors to consider. Number one, by revealing his secret in these specific circumstances, it forced Gakuganji to make a terrible choice. Would he betray his dying friend and report this secret to the higher-ups, or for once, would he do the right thing and keep it a secret? If someone like Gakuganji kept this secret, it'd be a massive character evolution, because from the start, he's been a rigid conservative who follows the law exactly. If he somehow found the courage to defy Jujutsu HQ, then it means that Gakuganji could be an ally to the current generation. Considering that Gojo and Yaga are now both gone, the Tokyo students honestly need all the help they can get, and this might have factored in to Yaga revealing this secret. On the other hand, maybe Yaga's true motivation was simply to protect his son, because at this stage in the timeline, the higher-ups had taken Panda as a hostage. In this scene, Yaga was actually on his way to save Panda, but now that he was dying, maybe he thought that revealing this secret would save his son from getting dissected or killed or whatever else the higher-ups were going to do with him. Importantly though, what Yaga didn't know is that Panda ended up getting freed by Kusakabe, and the reason Kusakabe did this is that he was repaying a big favor that Yaga had once done for his family. Anyway, with all that said, on November the 11th, Panda, Hikari, and Kirara joined Megumi's group in their mission to free Gojo and save Sumiki. As they were in the middle of discussing their next move, a new rule was added to the Culling Game for the first time. This new rule was added by a player named Kashimo, who's an ancient sorcerer from 400 years ago. Having already killed 40 sorcerers so far, Kashimo was looking for a new challenge, and in particular, he wanted to face Sukuna. As a reminder, centuries ago, ancient sorcerers like Sukuna and Kashimo were invited to join the Culling Game, and they became players the moment that Kenjaku broke this seal. Therefore, for Kashimo to find Sukuna, he spent 100 points to add a new rule that would allow players to access info about all other players. By speaking to this Shikigami that every player has, a person could find out the name, the points total, and the colony of anyone else. Because Sukuna agreed to be a player, that means that his vessel is the actual player, and in other words, Yuji has been a player in the Culling Game since day one. As a result, he got the notification when the new rule was added, and although it was a surprise, the group used it to their advantage. By searching up all the players with 100 plus points, the group became aware of both Kashimo and another player called Higuruma. Megumi's plan was to hunt down both of these sorcerers and convince them to use their points to add rules that would save Sumiki. In particular, he wanted to add a rule that would allow players to transfer points to each other, because that way you can change your points total without killing anyone. Remember, according to Rule 8 of the Culling Game, a player's points total needs to change at least once every 19 days, and usually that's done by killing people, but if you could transfer points, then you can do it without having to go that far. On top of that, Fushiguro wanted a second rule that would possibly allow players to leave the game under the right conditions. Now, based on all the intel they had, Higuruma was located in the first Tokyo colony, while Kashimo and Angel were in the second. This meant, to achieve their goals, Megumi's group had to split up, and it was decided that Hikari would go after Kashimo, Panda would try to find Angel, Kiraru would monitor things outside the barriers, and these two would find Higuruma. At first, Yuji was hesitant to be alone with Megumi, because by now it was very clear that Sukuna was planning something to do with Fushiguro. Despite that, he was clearly unfazed, and on November the 12th, they entered Tokyo Colony 1. As soon as they stepped into the barrier, they got immediately separated, and this is one of the Culling Game's secret rules. Essentially, inside each Culling Game barrier, it has 9 locations where players will get teleported when they arrive. This helps to spread players out across the map, and more importantly, it forces the new sorcerers to control their curse energy. After all, with the right control, a sorcerer can reinforce their body to survive the fall, or they might just have a technique that allows them to fly. When Itadori entered the colony, he got attacked by 2 of these flying sorcerers, one who has a literal airplane on her head, and the other who had a helicopter. Following that, he knocked them both out in slightly different ways, and his reward for this was that he got info about Higuruma from this guy. The name of this sorcerer is Rin Amai, and he's a normal guy from Yuji's hometown who's become one of the awakened sorcerers. Since joining the Culling Game, Amai was forced to work for the sorcerers who Yuji just beat up, but now that they were knocked out, he was pretty much free to go. As a thank you, he took Itadori directly to Higuruma, who was going through a midlife crisis at the time. For context, before the Culling Game even began, Higuruma had been a criminal defense lawyer. In this job, he would often defend people that no one else would, because if he saw a slight hint of innocence, then he'd do everything to make sure they weren't wrongly sent to jail. Sadly, the legal system isn't always about true justice, and sometimes, public opinion and bias from the judges, it can lead to unfair convictions. Recently, Higuruma had a case that he managed to win, but when the case went to appeal, his client got life in prison even though there was no new evidence. In response, Higuruma just snapped, and thanks to the powers given to him by Kenjaku, he unleashed a domain expansion. By the time Yuji found him, this lawyer had killed a judge, a prosecutor, and 20 sorcerers since the Culling Game began. Despite that, Itadori hoped that an awakened sorcerer like Higuruma would be open to adding a rule that could save innocent people. His reasoning was that modern people are less bloodthirsty than the ancient sorcerers, and for the most part this is true. However, in this case, Higuruma had no interest in changing the rules because the rules represent something that's important to him. Unlike the legal system, which pretends to be impartial, the Culling Game rules apply equally to every player. Regardless of how strong or weak a player is, if they break the Culling Game rules, then the game will punish them instantly and without any personal bias. After everything he's been through, a fair system like that kind of intrigued him, and he even said that he wanted to see curse technique removal. By that point, Yuji realized that he'd have to fight to add this new rule, and as he was getting ready, Higuruma just popped out his domain. As a lawyer, Higuruma's domain is one that puts his victims on trial for a random crime that they've committed during their life. The crime itself is selected by Judge Man, who's his Shikigami, and Judge Man knows everything about every soul inside this domain. In other words, Judge Man knows if you actually did the crime, but you can avoid punishment if you make a better argument than Higuruma. When it comes to Yuji, he was accused of being a customer at a pachinko parlor, even though he's underage. A pachinko parlor is basically like a casino, and Itadori's options were to either deny the charge, confess to the crime, or just say nothing. The problem with saying nothing is that Higuruma has a piece of evidence given to him by Judge Man that may or may not prove Yuji's guilt. For example, it might show that he entered the parlor, it might even show that he played games in the parlor, or alternatively, it might prove nothing. If Yuji stays silent, then he'd be taking a huge risk because at this stage he didn't know what the evidence was. As a result, he defended himself against the charge by arguing that he only entered the parlor to take a This argument was a lie since he did actually go there to play games, but by telling this lie, it meant that he might be safe if the evidence didn't show him playing games. Sadly, when Higuruma revealed the evidence, it showed Yuji getting out money from a nearby cash exchange. When you combine this evidence with the fact that Yuji admitted going inside, his story about needing to take a shit becomes a lot less believable. Based on the two arguments that were presented, Judgman found Itadori guilty, and in this case, the punishment was confiscation. Usually, confiscation makes it impossible for a person to use their curse technique, but for sorcerers like Yuji who don't have a technique, it disables their curse energy. Without anything to reinforce himself, Yuji got hunted down by Higuruma, whose natural talent is easily grade 1 level. Although Yuji's toughness was enough to survive for a while, you could tell that in this scene he was reaching his limit when he got hit with this giant gavel. At that stage, he desperately needed a breather, and he managed to buy himself some time by requesting a second trial. According to the rules of Higuruma's domain, a person can request up to 2 new trials as long as they don't fully confess to their first crime. Requesting this trial was honestly one of the highest IQ moments that we've seen from Yuji, because he didn't know that retrials were an option, but he just kind of worked it out based on what he knows about the legal system and what he knows about sorcery. During this second trial, Judgman accused Yuji of mass murder in Shibuya, given that his body was used to massacre countless innocent people. Ever since then, Itadori felt immense guilt for what happened, because he felt like it was his fault for not being able to suppress Sukuna. This is why Yuji fully confessed to the crime in front of Judgman, and this shocked Higuruma a lot. The reason Higuruma couldn't believe this is that Judgman had given him proof that Sukuna is the one who killed all those people. For that reason, he couldn't understand why an innocent person would confess, because in his words, all people are weak and ugly on the inside. In his mind, this ugliness is why the world is so unfair, and it's why he felt somewhat justified in killing the judge and the prosecutor. However, the problem for Higuruma is that Yuji's confession proved him wrong. It showed that there are good, honest people in the world. At first, Higuruma didn't want to admit it, hence why he still tried to kill Yuji with the executioner's sword. This sword is one that he gets when someone is given the death penalty, and it has the power to kill any person in one hit, even if they're a special grade sorcerer. Regardless, Higuruma knew for a fact that Yuji was an innocent person, and when we consider the fact that he became a lawyer to defend the innocent, there was no way he was going to kill someone who doesn't deserve the death penalty. By sparing Itadori's life, even though Judgman said to kill him, Higuruma was essentially returning to his original self, the one who was willing to defend people if he truly believed they were innocent. Not long after this, he added a new rule to the Culling Game at Yuji's request to allow the transfer of points between players. Higuruma then gave 1 point to Yuji so that he survived for the next 19 days, and then immediately left. Even though Yuji wanted him to stay and potentially help them, Higuruma said that if he stayed around Itadori, it would just make him hate himself, because Itadori is a reminder of the bad things he shouldn't have done. Now, at the exact same time Higuruma added this new rule, Megumi was fighting for his life on another side of the colony. After getting separated from Yuji, he found himself getting tricked and brutally attacked by a small group of Culling Game players. The leader of this group was an ancient sorcerer named Reggie, and at first he wanted Fushiguro to join his group. Reggie's belief was that he needs to gather strong allies and as many points as possible to prepare for any surprises that Kinjaku has in store. As he said this, we were shown Kinjaku in a room with the Chinese government, but as of right now, it's not explained what he's up to. Now, when negotiations broke down between Megumi and Reggie's group, all of them attempted to kill him for the points. That's why he was fighting for his life when Higuruma made the new rule, although by that point, a member of Reggie's group had run away, and the other wasn't very strong. After Fushiguro killed this guy, there were only 2 members left, but the problem is that it'd be nearly impossible to kill both of them at the same time. Luckily, this part is when Takaba showed up, and for context, Takaba is an awakened sorcerer that chose to protect Megumi. Takaba's reasoning for doing this was that Reggie and Hazunoki were cowards for attacking a teenager in a 2v1. This is why he decided to intervene, and the good thing is that he's genuinely top 1. Before the Culling Game started, Takaba was a failed comedian, and so his curse technique is one that turns his jokes into reality. If he thinks something is funny, then that thing will happen in the real world, and according to the narrator, it's a power that would even give Gojo some trouble. That being said, the downside here is that he doesn't actually know he has a technique, but because he just makes jokes all the time, he ends up using it almost by accident. Now, as a team, Takaba and Megumi chose to split up, with the comedian going after this bomb guy, while Fushiguro went after Reggie. As you can see, Reggie's entire body is covered in receipts, and that's because by burning a receipt with curse energy, his technique is able to recreate whatever the receipt was for. Some quick examples include manifesting a surfboard to avoid getting wet, creating stuffed animals to break his fall, a 3-day spa to heal his body, and a drone that was able to track Megumi's location. When Reggie manifests an object, he's also able to give the object basic commands, like when he sent this pile of things flying towards Fushiguro. Of course, most techniques do have some kind of drawback, and the downside to this is that once he gives an object a command, it just disappears. So, sometimes it's better not to use them like this, and if you just use them normally, then they won't disappear. Anyway, during their fight, Fushiguro is the one who lured Reggie into this gym and then whipped out his domain expansion. In the past, we've seen that his domain is incomplete, meaning that he hasn't found the right measurements for his domain barrier. The reason these measurements are so difficult is that domains often look bigger on the inside than they actually are on the outside. And so, visualizing how to put a bigger space onto a smaller space, it sounds like a difficult thing. To get around this, Megumi found a gym that was the perfect size for the inside of his domain, and then he used this external structure as a replacement for the barrier. When Reggie got caught inside this domain, he immediately countered by using Hollow Wicker Basket, which is a super old anti-domain technique. This technique protects the user from the domain's guaranteed hit effect, but in this case, the problem for Reggie was that Megumi's incomplete domain doesn't have a sure hit. Instead, the main benefit here is that it massively improves his technique to 120%. In this domain, he can create copies of himself and Hishikigami, and for a while he just uses this to completely dominate the fight. However, during this onslaught, the ancient sorcerer realized a weakness, which is that if something falls into Megumi's shadow, then Megumi himself has to carry the weight of that thing. This is how the 10 shadows has always worked, and it's why he doesn't really store many things inside the shadows. Most of the time it's just this one weapon, because he's just carrying that weight around all the time. Reggie took advantage of this by dropping 3 cars into the surface of the domain, which increased the weight on Megumi by 2.4 tons. Reggie's plan was to just keep adding things until Fushiguro was crushed to death, but Megumi countered him by dropping Max Elephant on his head. Remember, the surface of Megumi's domain is shadows, which essentially feels like water, and so for Reggie to stand on this without falling in, he's had to reinforce his feet the entire time. Now that he had an elephant on his head, this reinforcement became more and more difficult until Reggie sank into the shadows. These shadows don't have oxygen or anything to breathe, and so by falling into it, Reggie was about to drown. The only reason he survived is that the 3 cars he dropped in here were still in the shadows, and so he commanded one of them to raise him back to the surface. Doing this was a pretty smart way to save himself from drowning, but the side effect was that Megumi's weight was reduced by 1 car. To fix this, Reggie recreated a house weighing over 30 tons, and if this had landed on Fushiguro, obviously he'd be dead. In response, Megumi avoided the house by doing 2 specific things. Firstly, he went into his own shadow and kind of hid in there, and then he turned off his domain expansion. Now that his domain was gone, the house just crashed into the floor of the gym, and underneath this gym was a swimming pool. Reggie fell into this pool when the floor caved in, and as he was sinking, Megumi just came out of nowhere and strangled him. Even though Reggie's tough, he had no chance of escaping this, because the cars that he left in Fushiguro's shadow was now weighing them both down. The weight of those 2 cars are why he now couldn't escape, and so Reggie turned off his technique, and shortly after this, him and Fushiguro fought to the death. The interesting thing about this fight is that when these 2 first met, Reggie had injured Divine Dog, and from that point on, Fushiguro just never used it again. This gave the impression that the dog was injured and unavailable, and by this stage, Reggie was certain it couldn't be used. That's why he was able to catch the ancient sorcerer by surprise, as the dog just ripped out a chunk of his upper body. As Reggie then bled out, he didn't have any hard feelings towards Megumi, because for an ancient sorcerer, it's quite a normal thing to die in battle. Before his death, he actually gave Megumi a present by transferring him all of his remaining points. Reggie claimed that doing this would make things pretty interesting, but overall he seemed to be pretty sure that Megumi wouldn't survive the Culling Game. Meanwhile, outside the gym, Hazenoki learned about his boss's death and immediately lost all interest in fighting. Up until then, Takaba had been immune to all of Hazenoki's explosions, but at the same time, Takaba doesn't like to kill, so, overall, both of them were fine to just leave it as a draw. Elsewhere inside the barrier, after beating Reggie, Fushiguro hunted down Remy, who's the girl that tricked him and lured him into this situation. Even though he did have a clear chance to kill her, Fushiguro heard the voice of his sister in his head telling him not to do it. That voice was enough to convince him to walk away, and eventually he just collapsed from exhaustion. Considering this is the Culling Game, for a person to lay down unconscious, it would usually be a bad idea, but in this case, it worked out perfectly. This is because Angel is the one who found him, and as we know, she's the sorcerer they need to free Gojo. Based on what Tengen said, Angel was meant to be in the other Tokyo colony, but somehow she made it here, and she had a clear interest in Megumi. Now, if we switch our attention to the Sendai Colony, this place is where Yuta had been for the last few days. In terms of distance, Sendai is around 200 miles away from all of the craziness happening in Tokyo, and the reason he traveled this far is that he didn't want to kill his friends. It's important to remember that barriers in JJK usually block phone signals, and so Yuta has had zero contact with the outside world, and he had no idea when his friends would join the game. If he had gone to one of the Tokyo barriers, then he might have ended up killing them by accident, so yeah, traveling to Sendai was the safest option. Unfortunately, once Yuta arrived, it became clear that this colony is the most dangerous one in the entire game. In particular, you had a 2,000-year-old sorcerer who once conquered Japan, a 1,000-year-old sorcerer from the same era as Sukuna, and you also had a 400-year-old sorcerer with the highest curse energy output in the game. On top of all of that, there was a special grade cockroach known as Kururushi who was released into the Culling Game by Kenjaku. In total, these 4 players had almost 300 points between them, and they were a danger to all civilians who were left inside the colony. For that reason, Yuta spent a lot of time protecting these innocent people, and one of his goals was to add a rule that would allow people to leave the barrier. At the same time, he was aware that by adding a rule like this, it would allow dangerous players to escape, especially ones like Druve who just kill people at random. This is why Yuta wanted to add another rule that would allow communication between the different colonies, because if you have communication, then it means that he and his allies could wipe out all the dangerous players before then allowing people to leave. With all that said, on the 12th of November, around half an hour before Yuji and Megumi entered the game, Yuta killed Druve. Impressively, he did this without taking any damage, and once Druve was dead, it led to a chain reaction. Until recently, Druve's presence is why Kururushi had gone into hiding, but now that Druve was gone, it meant the cockroach was free to come out, and its goal was to eat as many humans as possible. In the chaos that followed, a couple civilians did get eaten alive, forcing Yuta to take a stand against the cursed spirit. Like I said before, this cockroach is a powerful special grade, and it had cursed tools, an army of cockroaches, and Shikigami as part of its arsenal. During the fight, these 2 Shikigami blinded Yuta for a split second, and Kururushi took advantage of this by infesting his body with insects and then impaling him with the festering life sword. If Okkotsu didn't have reverse curse technique, then this would have been the end for him, but luckily, RCT was Kururushi's biggest weakness. As a quick reminder, curses like this are made purely from negative curse energy, and so the positive energy of RCT is basically poison to them. By kissing Kururushi and pumping RCT into its system, Yuta exploited the weakness of all curses and caused the special grade to explode. Following that win, he barely had a second to catch his breath as Uro appeared out of nowhere and sent him flying across the town. I mentioned earlier that Uro is from the exact same era as Sukuna, and her curse technique allows her to manipulate the surface of space. When used correctly, this power can fling people around, redirect attacks, defend the user, and just cause widespread chaos. In her first life, Uro was the captain of the Sun, Moon, and Star Squad, which was an elite team of sorcerer assassins who worked for the Fujiwara clan. Back in those days, the Fujiwara clan were the strongest sorcerer family, and despite dedicating her life to them, they killed Uro for a crime she didn't commit. This is why she sees the Culling Game as a second chance at life, and this time she wanted to live for herself and not for someone else. As a result, her mission in the Sendai Colony is to kill as many different sorcerers as possible, because by gaining a lot of points, she'll be prepared for anything Kenjaku does. By contrast, when we look at Yuta, this is someone who is not a naturally violent person, and when he does kill, it's always to protect other people. This is why he asked her if she had any friends, because he just couldn't understand why someone would kill purely for their own benefit. Understandably, Uro was pissed off by this question, and as she tries to strangle him, they got interrupted by Ryu Ishigori. I mentioned earlier that Ryu is the sorcerer with the highest output in the Culling Game, and his technique lets him fire off these huge blasts of curse energy. Unlike other sorcerers, Ishigori's curse energy can track down his opponent, like in this scene where the blasts are clearly following Yuta. Also, when it comes to his motivation, unlike Uro, who was desperate to start a second life, Ryu's motivation was just to find a worthy opponent to battle with before he dies. Recently, he'd been watching from a distance as Okkotsu fought against the cockroach and against Uro, and he had a suspicion that Okkotsu could be the one. Following this, Ryu, Yuta, and Uro have an epic battle across Sendai, and eventually, Rika was brought into the situation. As we know, the real Rika is dead and her soul passed away, but when she disappeared about a year ago, she left behind this Shikigami. This Shikigami contains Rika's will, and when Yuta puts on the ring, he's fully connected to her for 5 minutes. During those 5 minutes, she provides him with extra curse energy, curse tools, and most importantly, curse techniques. By consuming the body part of a Jujutsu sorcerer, Rika is able to store a copy of that person's technique, and then Yuta can access those copies when he has the ring on. On top of that, she can also fight for him like a normal Shikigami, and this is a big help when you're getting jumped by ancient sorcerers. Eventually though, after fighting for a while, Ishiguro got tired of playing around and he wanted to end things with a domain expansion. Yuta and Uro responded in the exact same way, and as their 3 domains began to overlap, the winner was Kurorushi. Even though Yuta had killed this curse not that long ago, it had the unique ability to self-reproduce. Before it battled against Yuta for the first time, the curse had created its own child, and according to the manga, when the parent died, the child inherited that same curse energy. Now, as the domains were forming, it was Kurorushi who crashed the party by breaking into the barriers from the outside. Once the domains collapsed, a lot of things happened in a short space of time, so let's go through the main points. Firstly, Yuta kicked Uro directly into the path of Kurorushi, and on this occasion he chopped off her arm with the Festering Life Sword. This arm was then immediately eaten by Rika, and the result was that Yuta now had a copy of Uro's curse technique. The one problem is that he wasn't able to use it straight away, because with the exception of Higuruma and people like this, once you've opened a domain, there's a thing called curse technique burnout, where sorcerers aren't able to use their techniques, at least for a while. Ryu is one of those special people who doesn't have to worry about burnout, since he can fire off curse energy with or without his technique. In this scene, he chose to blast Uro and Kurorushi at the same time, and the reason he did this was to get them out the way, because like I said before, he sees Yuta as his main challenge. Yuta then swooped in to finish off the cursed spirit, and after that, he had a direct standoff with Ishiguro. When Yuta saw Ryu's face, he could tell that he wanted them to both go all out and just blast each other with their max outputs. Tactically speaking, going all out wasn't Yuta's best option, but like I said, when he saw Ryu's face, he decided to indulge him this one time. In the clash that followed, Ishiguro's cursed energy overpowered Yuta's, but the special grade managed to avoid taking the hit. Ryu then fired a second blast directly at him, but Okkotsu was able to deflect it by using Uro's technique. This sent the cursed energy flying directly into the sky, and shortly after this, Yuta's 5 minutes with Rika were done. Now that the timer had reached 0, his connection with Rika was over, and so he and Ryu fought each other with pretty much the last drops of their curse energy. This type of battle is exactly what Ishiguro had been hoping for. In fact, it's even better than what he was hoping for. And the fight ended when Yuta held him in place and forced him to get hit with his own curse energy. Okkotsu had deflected this energy knowing that it would obviously come back, and everything he did after that was to make sure Ryu would be in the right position. As a side note, I think it's worth pointing out that when this fight began, when Yuta started fighting against Druve and Kurorushi, at that point in the timeline, Yuji and Higuruma hadn't met. However, by the time Ryu regained his consciousness, Higuruma had added the rule that allowed for the transfer of points. For that reason, Yuta didn't have to kill him or Uro, and instead he just got the two of them to transfer a huge chunk of points. By the end of that, Okkotsu's point total had risen to 190, which is nearly enough to add 2 brand new rules. The season then comes to an end with a montage of various things from other colonies, as we see Maki destroying a cursed spirit, Kashimo murdering yet another player, Hakari chilling with an awakened sorcerer, and Yuji and Takaba chasing after Angel. On top of that, we see Kenjaku underwater with the prison realm, and the trailer for season 4 reveals that, he's just dropping this thing into the ocean. With all that said, my friends, that was everything you need to know from JJK Season 3. We've gone through all the main plot points and the things that are really important, and if you enjoyed the video, then be sure to drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. As always, thank you for watching till the end, and until the next one, peace out.